He was thank you. He was a Sunday school teacher and did a lot of really good things for the church. And so the pastor was eulogizing him, and he said something I've never heard a pastor say. He said that when he got the news that Todd had passed, it was the first time that he questioned the Lord. He actually said, I was in doubt. I couldn't understand what was happening and all of that. And then he said something that it connects to today's lesson that I've never forgotten when I heard it. He said that he heard from the Lord, and the Lord shared with him that even if I told you what I'm doing, you wouldn't understand. That if I told you all of what I have and what I'm trying to do, you would never understand. And I thought about that because in today's lesson, when we talk about Revelation and we talk about the new church and all of what's new, it requires us to think a little bit differently. Folks will tell you the term that you hear now is that people should be thinking outside the box. I have a little different spin on that. I don't think you need to think outside the box. I think you need to get outside the box and think. And the difference between the two of those is the fact that when you get out the box and think, you can start to imagine things that your flesh doesn't allow you to do in this life. So we can't imagine what heaven's like because we have limitations with our flesh. And the book of Revelations is trying to give us just a glimpse of what that might look like. But our flesh limits us because our capacity to think is only based on what we know about life itself. So the Apostle John is being transitioned in to look at this and to get us to look at this from a different perspective, not thinking outside the box, but getting out of the box and thinking differently. And that's what the lesson is all about. So if you look at verse number 9 in this lesson today, and I'm going to start with 9 because it's a transition to verses 10 through 21. And what happens is when you look at verse 9, you start to understand, and I didn't, when you study these lessons, I was ministering to myself. You start to understand the roles of the angels and what the angels, the capacity of them and what they were contracted to do. The roles of the angels were they would sound a trumpet when there was a warning. They would pour out the things that needed to happen to sinners, but they also were, and what they did was discover new things for those who are about the heir of salvation. So they were the ones who would share with us what that salvation would look like in the book of Revelation. And so through the Apostle John, they give him a view. So in verse number 9 is the transition of that taking place. So if you look at that verse in verse number 9, and what it says, and there came unto them 7 angels, which had 7 vials full of 7 last plagues. The angels are predicting and distributing the plagues, and talk with me, saying, come hither, I will show you the bride. And what they're doing is using the bride as a symbolism of the church. And so that verse number 9 transitions into our lesson to this morning, which is verse number 10 through 21. So it's all about that the angels showing John the view of what the new church and what the new earth looks like. Now, I thought about this long and hard. If it's a new earth and it's a new heaven, then that means that the old has been discarded. So that means you can't think like the old. So for us to understand the new, we have to discard the old. That's my rationale for saying you got to get outside the box and think, because you can't think like the old. You have to think and understand the new, which, again, we're limited and because of what we know. So what John is about to see is something that is the flesh limits us in our capacity to really be able to understand the magnificence of all of what the Lord is going to try to show him. But he's going to get that view. So if you look at verse number 10, verse number 10 says, and he carried me away, and the angels are carrying him away, carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. The first thing I thought about is when you look at verse 10, is it says that he took him to a high mountain. Now, if you want to understand the difference between the old and new, sometimes you need to change your view. So what happens is that in order for you to be able to see what the Lord wants you to see, you can't see that from the ground. There's a reason why he took him to a high mountain. One being that you can't see what you need to see from the ground. And number two, if you ever look at something from above, it changes your view. All you got to do is go up here, take a look at church from there. It changes your view. It changes what you see. In order for John to understand what the new earth and what the new heaven was going to look like, he had to change his view. The other example I just want to use is that when you're dealing with anything in leadership and you're dealing with folks in general and trying to understand, what's happening, oftentimes you don't really see what's happening when you're in the mix of it, when you're in the weeds. You don't really see it. You have to go above and be able to see that. You got to be able to get out of that to be able to see that. So the angel is trying to show John and take him higher so that he can see. That was one reason. The second reason is that, and I guess this is the reason why people want to climb Mount Everest and do all these other things, is that the higher you go, the closer you are to heaven. So you go higher, you get closer to where you want to be. So you get a better view, but you're also getting closer. And these are all symbolisms of being able to see what it is that you need to see. So the angels in verse 10 are showing John how the church will look, but he has to, in order for him to understand what it really looks like, he has to look and he has to change his view. He has to look at it from a different angle. And it clearly shows how John is connected and how he's connected to that in that view. Then we look at verse 11. And verse 11 says, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear or crystal. Now, I know that from my biblical research that the Lord does nothing and has nothing in his word that doesn't have some kind of connotation to it. So I'm looking at the stone, and I did a lot of examining about stones because they're mentioned throughout the book of Revelations. So when you talk about precious stones, there's a reason why jasper was used. Jasper was used because it was, number one, it was costly, but it was durable. And if you're going to build a foundation, you got to have something that's durable. So there isn't, when you think about these words in the Bible, they're just not there just to be there. They're there because the Lord had a reason. So what it does is jasper, and so I looked up jasper, and I'm going to give you some of this a little bit later, but I want to just give you what jasper was really about. So I did a little research on this. Jasper was best known for relieving stress. It helps you to achieve a state of calm, to eliminate absolute negativity, protects your energy, and protects you in hard times. That's what jasper is about. So you look at it from a just a purely your view, physical view. You look at it; it's a pretty stone, but it has some biblical connotations to it that are behind the scenes. So there's a reason why jasper was used as one of the stones in the foundation. So in that verse, in verse number 11, what John is being able to see is to understand that one of the pillars of the foundation was like a precious stone, like jasper, clear, and crystal. Then we look at verse number 12. And verse number 12 says, and it had a great, a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and the gates 12 angels, and the names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So, we just had the 100th anniversary. I was not here for that, but I know it was outstanding. And one of the things that you understand with the 100th anniversary, or any anniversary, is the foundation of the church. So these things don't happen without other people laying the foundation. There are a lot of people that laid the foundation for us to be here today. And if you think about all of what happens, the foundation, if you don't have a strong foundation, you know what happens. The rest of things just disappear. When you look at this and you look at the wall, so I want to just examine that verse and get us to see what's happening in that verse. In verse 12, it says there's a wall and there's a gate. So if there's a wall, that means there has to be separation. So the question then becomes, how can this be heaven if there's a wall? Because in heaven there would be no separation. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. The reason why this is the way it is here is because this is not heaven. This is a glimpse of what heaven could be like. John is not looking at the actual heaven. He's looking at a glimpse. And understand, and this is why I started with thinking you got to get outside the box and think. Understand, John being a man, his limitations and what he's thinking, there isn't any way for him to imagine the enormity of what this would look like if the wall didn't have any length to it. So they have to put limitations to it. Man puts limitations to it. So when you look at how these are described, that's what it was for. But let me just tell you what the wall was all about. The wall was for security. So the question then becomes, why you need security in heaven? Well, that's the reason why this is not heaven. This is a glimpse of what heaven could look like, but it has to be done in the context of what we understand about our flesh. So we understand security in flesh. And I thought about this when I thought about the wall. I had an opportunity when I was principal in Westerville. I took my students to Beijing, China, and I got a chance to walk around the neighborhood. And I'm walking around the neighborhood in this Chinese neighborhood, and they had walls on all of their homes. And on the top of the wall, they had taken glass and cut like bottle glass and cut the glass and used that and cemented it into the top. So if you try to put your hands on it, you'd cut your hands trying to get in. And when I think about that, and I was thinking about that while I was doing this, the reason why they did that is because of separation. There's a separation between them and the people that they wanted. And I thought about this with this wall. The wall was meant to separate good and evil. The wall was meant to keep the evilness out. You don't need to do that in heaven because there is no evil. But when we look at where we are now and we all understand that we got to separate. So what this is telling us is this: you don't separate, you don't get into heaven. You've got to separate from the things that you do that are here, because the separation is the thing that's going to get you into heaven. The other reason why there is a need for us to understand this is that there's a gate. The gate means that there has to be an entrance. So if there's an entrance, that also means that there would be an exit in our mind. In heaven, there is no exit. I don't know about you. I don't want to exit heaven. Once I get in, I'm in. I don't want to get out. But if I look at this from a purely carnal standpoint, we understand exits, entrances, and exits. So in this depiction that John sees, there is an entrance and there is an exit. Then you have to look at the size of the wall. The size. So I looked this up in a couple of different ways. In some depictions, it talks about the wall being 70 yards high. Well, that's almost a football field high. Again, that's a limitation for us. Now, we know that if it's a heavenly wall, it's infinity. But for our minds, 70 yards, we understand what that looks like, so we just say a football field. Then it's built of jasper for firmness. You go back to what I just talked about with jasper and what jasper looks like. So it's built with jasper for firmness. And I love this. It's impregnable and precious at the same time. Impregnable meaning that you can't penetrate, and precious at the same time. Now, it's really difficult to sometimes look good and be firm. Because, when people are angry, they, have an angry look on their face. But to be firm and still be strong without with still having some graciousness is the reflection of the church. And so it's impregnable and precious at the same time. The other thing that's significant about the wall is the fact that the length and the breadth are equal. So what that means then is when you look at this from a purely, and I'm not going to get deep into the math piece of this, but when you look at the sums of sides and they're equal, what that means is that, and I thought this was really interesting, is that the reason why they mentioned the equalness of the sides is because the fact that the Lord's grace and mercy will then extend from the east to the west to the north to the south in all equal parts. All equal parts, not unequal. So if you look at a triangle, you're going to have unequal parts. But when you look at this, it's an equal distribution of God's grace throughout. So when we look at heaven and the depiction that we're seeing here about heaven, it's an equal distribution to all believers and all those who believe Christ, that you will have that equal distribution of God's glory throughout heaven. The other part that is significant about the size of the wall, and again, this gets back to our finiteness of our ability to understand, is that the Bible talks about, in my house there are many mansions. Many mansions. So if there are many mansions in the house, I told you, if it was not, I would tell you that if it wasn't, there are many mansions. So if there are many mansions, then it has to be extremely large. So when I look at many mansions, then I put a limit on it with my finiteness of the flesh. But in the spiritual realm, there is no limitation. It's almost like when you are writing a document and you stretch the document and it just fits the page. It keeps going until you just keep putting words in it. That's where the mansion, it just continues to go until the number of people that need to be there are there. And the idea is that heaven is able to accommodate all who believe, all. Not just some, all who believe. And John is getting that depiction of what that looks like through the symbolism of the wall, through the symbolism of the gate, through the symbolism of the size and the metrics that are described. Now, the metrics that are described are for us because of our flesh. In heaven, they have no diameters. There's no need for metrics in heaven. And this is, again, I'm going to keep going back to this. You got to get outside, you got to get out of your box and think. Because now when you think about it, I don't have a reason to be angry at anyone. I don't have a reason to do anything that's negative in heaven because it's all about God's glory. Here, when I look at it through my finiteness, I know the limitations because I only understand what I understand here. And that's why I referenced the eulogy with Todd, because what it showed me was that in my limited amount, I don't care how much I know, how much I think I know, I can never understand all of what the Lord has in store. I can't. It's too magnificent for me. I can try to put it together and rationalize and all of that. I can't do that. And so what John is saying is, and it talks about there, is a glimpse. And the glimpse is related to our finiteness and what we understand about our understanding of who the Lord is and what heaven looks like. So it's a really interesting depiction of what heaven could look like in that glimpse. Verse 13 refers back to the gates. If you go to verse 13, verse 13 says, on the east, and this refers to the point that I was making about the equalness of the gates. Verse 13, the gates to the east, to the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates, and symbolizing how the Lord is equally distributing all of his glory throughout, and it's all equal. And then in 14, it talks about, and the wall and of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. This goes back to the example that I shared about the laying the foundation, and the folks that in the reference to our anniversary and all of the saints who laid the foundation for this church to be able to do and be what it is today. And so we have to always remember, and I thought this was really interesting, and it said this when I was reading through this, is that sometimes people forget where they came from. Sometimes people forget the people who have done the back-breaking work to get you where you are. Sometimes people forget that because they get the benefit of that. Sometimes, I guess the easiest way for me to put it is sometimes people forget the practice. They only think about the game. But there's practice that goes into before you get to the game. So you see somebody perform and you say, well, they just do that, it's real easy. You don't understand what they went through. When you look at where we are today as a church, don't forget the people who paid the price for us to do what we need to do. And what the Lord is doing here is acknowledging those 12 apostles who were part of that foundation. He's making it clear, and I just thought this was really interesting in the fact that the commentary I was studying from talked about the Lord never forgot that they were the ones that had to bear the brunt and of all of the negativity and all the things that were going on. They're the ones that bared that brunt, and they're the ones that were a part of that. That's the reason why the 12 stones and all of that's in that foundation are there, because of the work that they've done. And so the Lord didn't forget. Verse 15, and again, some of this I've covered, but I just want to for the sake of understanding the lesson, verse 15 is talking about, and it says, and he talked with me, had a golden reed to measure the city and the gates thereof and the wall thereof. And what it's talking about there is that there was a measurement, and this goes back to the point I made about us and our understanding about the measurement. John had to have a measurement to be able to articulate that to the believers so that they could kind of get an idea of what it is. But in the real heaven, there's no need for measurement. But they had to have a measurement because of what we understand as human beings. We understand measurements, we understand limitations, and all of those kinds of things. Then in 16, it says, and the city was 4 square, and the length large as the breadth, and measured by the city with 12,000 furlongs. The length and breadth and the height are all equal. It mentioned the fact that, and I didn't look this up, but it mentioned it in the reading, that it was 1,500 German miles. Now, I don't really know how German miles are different than our miles, but it mentioned 1,500. It was as big as 1,500 German miles. And so I'm going to do my own kind of synopsis of that. That's just 1,500 miles. But even with 1,500 miles, there's still a limitation to that and being able to look at that. And then we get into in 17, it talks about the 40 cubits and the measurement. And the key part here in verse 17 is it talks about according to the measure of a man, which illustrates my point and affirms the point that he's looking at it. He's looking at the new earth. He's looking at the new church. He's looking at the new world through the measurement of a man, which, if it's a measurement of a man, is going to naturally have limitations to it. And there are going to be things that you can't see. And so in that verse, that talks about those limitations. Then in 18, and it says, in the building of the wall, it was of jasper, and we talked about that, and was pure gold, unlike clear glass. So I did a little research. I said, so let me find out. There has to be, and I know there is, symbolism behind each one of the 12 stones that are going to go into this wall. There has to be a symbolism. So what I did is I put together, I just called it my stone page. And so what I've tried to do is and I'm going to do this for you here real quickly, is try to get you to understand the significance of each one of the stones that goes into the wall, because each one of them have a significance. So when you look at verse number 18, it says, the building of the wall was of jasper and the city was pure gold. And in 19, it talks about the foundation and the precious stone. It mentions in verse 19 each one of the stones, each one of the 12 stones. And the first foundation was jasper. Well, I've already told you about jasper, and you go back and look at jasper, about what jasper did. And just to reiterate, when you look at jasper, best known for relieving stress, help you to achieve a state of calm, protects your energy, and protects you during hard times. That's what jasper was about. That's one of the stones. But what about the other 11? What did they do? So let me give you an idea. Now, some of these I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing. I'm going to do the best I can. But I want to give you an idea of what these stones are all about. So sapphire, which was the next one that's in there. If you look at, I'm taking this from verse 19 and 20. When you look at it, the next one is sapphire. Now, we look at sapphire, and we think sapphire, glitters and all of that. Sapphire was the third hardest stone after a diamond. third hardest stone after diamond. So sapphire was used to be able to add strength to the wall and add strength to the foundation. So as one of the foundations of one of the 12, so now you've got jasper and you've got sapphire. The third one is chelicani, I think is how you pronounce it. And the symbolism behind that is that it soothes self-doubt and brings inner peace. Soothes self-doubt and brings inner peace. The third stone was emerald. Emerald symbolizes hope, romance, and rebirth. Hope, romance, and rebirth. The fourth stone was Sardius, I think is how you pronounce it. And just bear with me on my pronunciations. You can read it and come up with your own. But the idea of that stone was that it was a stone of strength and protection, and it was associated with courage, happiness, and clear communication. So one of the foundations, one of the critical stones in the foundation was that you had clear communication and you want to have folks with courage. The next stone was Sardius, and it's associated with wisdom, and it was also used as the breastplate for the high priest. So when you looked at those breastplates, those high priests, the stone that they had on there that was shining was Sardius. And it was there because it was associated with wisdom, that it meant they had wisdom. The next stone was Crystallite, and this particular stone got rid of any guilt or self-doubt and allowed for a strong mind and the ability to face tough situations. That's what that stone referenced. The next stone was beryl. Beryl was a healing stone. So when you, and I often wondered, you'd go to different spas, they had beryl in the water and they'd have it steaming. That's the reason why they had, because it was meant to be a healing type stone. So that's why beryl was a part of that. The next stone was topaz. Topaz was to bring happiness, inner peace, relief from depression, and eradicates negativity. So we need to get some topaz around places as much as we can to eradicate any kind of negativity. So when you go to your job tomorrow and you're around negativity, get you some topaz and put it out there because it'll eradicate it right now. The next stone was chrysoprase. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it was a stone of prosperity. It meant that you would then have prosperity and you would be able to prosper. So it's one of the foundations that you would prosper. So the Bible talks about the Lord would not have us prosper. It's one of the foundations. So when you say, well, how can you say that? Well, it's in the foundation that we prosper. It's one of the precious stones that we prosper, so that we prosper. The next stone was jacinth, and it carried judgment and was also used on the breastplate. So on the breastplate was not only wisdom, but judgment for the high priest. So they had both. And then the last stone was amethyst, and it was a natural, and I thought this was interesting, a natural tranquilizer of spiritual awareness, and it actually opened up your intuition to make you think. So, void of my maybe butchering of some of the names, I think you get the idea of the significance of these stones. So when you read this and you look at this in this lesson and you see this and you see the names and all of that, sometimes we can get lost in the fact that these are just rocks. And these are just, there's really no, I don't understand the significance behind them. There is a complete significance behind each one of those. And then I went back, and when I looked at this, I said to myself, I'm trying to think of what's not covered. In this foundation, You know, if you think about what I just read off to all of you, I don't know what's not covered. It talks about love, peace, happiness, strength, all of the things that we would want to have as Christian believers. All of those things are covered in that verse. So the idea for John through the angels was for him to be able to see what the new earth and what the new heaven would look like. It won't look like it does now. And so we can't, if it's not going to look like it does now, we can't act like it looks like it does now. We can't do that. I think it's really interesting when I ask people about, you know, you prayed for something and you've done this and all that, and then after they pray for something, they look like like it's not going to happen. So if I pray for something and I want it to be, then I need to act like it's going to happen. I don't act like it happens after it happens. I act like it happens before it happens, because that then shows that I have faith in the fact that it will happen. And so what this is trying to get us to see is that we have to act like we are in the new heaven, even though we're not. So it doesn't give us an excuse to say, well, I'm in this world, and as we know, we're in this world, we're not of it. We're in it. But that doesn't mean we have to act like the people in it. We can act like we know we need to be. And we sometimes use that as an excuse. John, getting the glimpse in the book of Revelations in this chapter, is able to show that and share that with the believers about what this looks like. So it's really about a lesson of trying to change your thinking and how you think, and being able to look at things from a different lens. Remember, in order to do that, you have to change your position. So in summary, I have three things I just want to summarize with. The first one is that what I talked about is that for you to understand the new, you've got to get out of your box and think. Don't think outside the box. Get out of your box and think. The one example, I've used this in other talks that I've had, when I think outside the box, that doesn't mean my actions change. Thomas Jefferson was laid the cornerstone for the Declaration of Independence. He was adamant that all men be free, black men, all men be free. He made sure that got into the Declaration of Independence. When he went home, he had 167 slaves. So he thought outside the box, but he didn't act outside. You got to get out of the box, and if I got out of the box and thought, then I wouldn't be doing the things that I would do. So I've got to look at things differently. I can't just say this, I got to get out of my own box. So I got to get out of the box. The second point that I want to leave you with is that sometimes in order for you to see things differently, you got to change your view. You need to go to the top. You need to look down. You need to look at how things are. You need to cut your grass so you can see between the weeds. Because sometimes what you are missing is what you can't see. And the reason you can't see it is because your view has been distorted. And in this lesson today, John has a clearer view based off of the fact that he was able to see it from another angle. So get out of the box, change your view. And then the third point that I want to leave you with is that carnal separation leads to spiritual revelation. Carnal separation. That means that you had to separate. The wall separated. The gate separated. It allowed certain things to occur and certain things not to occur. Entrance and exits and all that. For us, as Christian believers, for us to be able to understand who and what we want to, what we understand and what we believe, you can't just be like everybody else. I mean, I don't know anything worse than for people to not know you're saved on your job. It should be clear. And the reason why it should be clear is because you shouldn't act like everybody else. If you do, then you are like everybody else. And I think it's important for us to understand carnal separation. You know, carnal separation will lead to spiritual revelation. The last story I want to leave you with, my father told me a long time ago, and my mother and father, both of them 89 and doing well, and shared with me a long time ago that he told me when I was in high school, he said, until you separate, nothing will change. There's the guys I was running around with, doing crazy stuff and all. He said, until you separate, nothing will change. And it didn't really hit me until he told me that. He said, and if you get in trouble and you have to go to jail, do whatever, I'm not coming. Well, I knew he wasn't coming. But then he said, I'm not letting your mother come either. So then I changed. So I know that separation is important. And it was important that I separated to be able to do the things that I need to do. So I thought it was a great lesson. I learned myself this morning, and I appreciate your attention this morning. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. You said the Lamb of, using the Lamb of Life, using the bride and the Lamb. If you look at how the Lord depicted, wanted us to depict, the Lamb was slaughtered and all of that, and looking at the Lamb of Life being Him, and the ability for us to be able to understand, this was really a kind of a symbolism of the bride and the bridegroom, and so being able to understand the Lamb of Life, being able to understand who the Lord was, and being able to see His vision. Yeah, really getting us to be able to see the vision through the Lamb of Life, who was our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who was sacrificed for our benefit, and so the Lamb of Life would be the connection there. So, good question. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. It was Revelations 21, 10 through 21. Other questions? See, I'm used to, like when I was a superintendent at a board meeting, I'd get hammered at in question time, so I'm ready to get whatever. All right. I thank you. I just want to close in prayer. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you for your lesson this morning. Thank you for your words this morning. Thank you for guiding this conversation. Thank you for the saints that have come out this morning to hear your word. Thank you for the message. We thank you. We ask that you bless the pastor and his family, that you bless this congregation, that you continue to help our church to grow, continue to help our Sunday school to grow. Thank you for the opportunities that you've given us. Thank you for your grace and mercy. But above all, Lord Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross on our behalf, and thank you for getting up on our behalf and continuing to guide us as we move forward. We give you all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise. In your sweet, sweet, precious name, amen. Thank you.
Just quickly, how many of you gleaned out of this lesson what was being said? The essence of it, the description of what? A new heaven and a new earth. Very simple. A new heaven and a new earth. And quickly, you Bible scholars, I want you to study and write this down. There are 7 dispensations in the Bible, but there are 8 covenants. Why are there 8 covenants? Write that down for yourself. And what is that last covenant? You just heard a description of it. A new heaven and a new earth. Amen? Amen. We're going, next week's lesson will be the river of life. Revelation 22, 1 through 7. That's next week's lesson. The river of life. Revelation 22 and 1 through 7. May God add a blessing to reading the word. Thank you, Dr. Bell. You studied intently all those foundations. How many foundations, how many levels of the foundation? I only couple people say it. 12. He said it. 12. All right. Amen. You can be dismissed, and we'll get ready for our next level into the service. Amen.